Take the baby away, I said quietly, before anyone in that delivery room could hand him to my son. The nurse froze, her hands hovering midair, and for a moment the only sound was the steady beeping of a heart monitor and the soft, stunned breath my son drew beside me. Ethan turned to me, his face pale under the harsh hospital lights, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Mom, what are you doing?" I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the nurse, steady, calm, as if I were asking for something as ordinary as a glass of water. "Please," I repeated, my tone firm but controlled. "Take the baby to the nursery. Right now." Olivia, lying in the hospital bed, still exhausted from labor, let out a weak, confused laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret, that's not funny," she said, her voice thin, strained, but there was something else beneath it. Something sharp, something nervous. I had heard that tone before, though I hadn't understood it then. The nurse hesitated, glancing between me, the new mother, and my son, who looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to step forward or fall back. "Is there a problem?" she asked carefully. I finally turned to Ethan, taking in the disbelief in his eyes, the hope that this was some kind of mistake. For 42 years, I had protected that look in him. I had built my life around it. And now, I was the one about to shatter it. "There is," I said softly, "but not the kind you think." Just 24 hours earlier, I had been sitting alone at my kitchen table, the late afternoon sun stretching long shadows across the hardwood floor, when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. At 71, you learn to ignore unfamiliar calls. But something in me, something quiet but insistent, told me to pick it up. "Mrs. Collins?" a man's voice asked, low and hesitant. "You don't know me, but you need to see something before that baby is born." I remember tightening my grip on the phone, my heart giving a slow, deliberate thud. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease rising in my chest. "It doesn't matter," he replied. "What matters is the truth. Check your email." Then he hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the blank screen, the silence in my house suddenly heavier than it had been since my husband passed 3 years ago. I had learned to live with silence. I had not learned to ignore warnings. When I opened my email, I found a single message with no subject line, just a video file. I hesitated before pressing play, my reflection faint in the dark screen, a woman who thought she understood her family. A woman who thought she knew the people she had welcomed into her home, into her life, into her son's future. The video began, and within seconds, that version of me was gone. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry out. I simply watched, my face still, my mind rearranging everything I thought I knew. Dates, conversations, small, forgotten moments that suddenly lined up like pieces of a puzzle I had never realized I was solving. By the time the video ended, the room felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I closed the laptop slowly, folding my hands in front of me as if I were saying grace before a meal. I had spent my entire life reacting with patience, with understanding, with the quiet hope that kindness would be returned in kind. But that night, something shifted. Not anger, not even betrayal, not in the way people usually describe it. What I felt was clarity. Clean, sharp, undeniable clarity. And in that clarity, I made a decision. I would not confront Olivia. I would not call Ethan. I would not create a scene or demand explanations that would only be denied. No, I would wait. I would let everything unfold exactly as planned. Her plan, not mine. Because timing, I realized, was the only thing that would make the truth impossible to ignore. And now, standing in that delivery room, watching the nurse slowly begin to carry the baby toward the door, I understood that the moment had finally come. I had let them believe I knew nothing. I had let them believe I was just an old woman, sentimental and blind, clinging to the idea of family. That was their first mistake. The second was thinking I wouldn't act when it mattered most. The nurse disappeared through the door with the baby, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced in years, as if the entire room had paused, waiting for someone to say something that would make sense of what I had just done. But I did not rush to fill it because I had learned that silence reveals more than words ever could, and in that silence I could hear Ethan's breathing grow uneven beside me, could feel his confusion turning into something sharper, something closer to fear. "Mom," he said again, this time louder, more insistent. You need to explain this right now. And I finally turned to face him fully, taking in the man he had become, the man I had raised after his father passed, the man who trusted me without question until this moment, and I felt the weight of that trust pressing against my chest. But I did not let it break me because I knew that what I was about to do would either destroy him or save him, and there was no gentle way to choose between those two outcomes. Olivia shifted in the bed, wincing slightly as she adjusted herself against the pillows, her hand gripping the thin hospital blanket as if it were something solid she could hold on to. "Margaret, this is completely inappropriate," she said, her voice trying to regain control, trying to sound offended rather than afraid. "You cannot just give orders like that. This is my child." And there it was again, that word, my, spoken too quickly, too defensively. And I noticed the way her eyes flicked toward Ethan for just a fraction of a second, searching, measuring, calculating whether he was still firmly on her side. And for a long time, he would have been. For a long time, I would have defended her myself. Because that is what you do when someone becomes part of your family. You choose to believe the best version of them. Even when small things begin to feel out of place, even when conversations end a little too quickly, even when timelines do not quite match the stories you are told. I had dismissed those things, all of them, because I wanted peace, because I believed that love, once given, would be returned with honesty. But sitting there now, I could see how carefully those moments had been arranged, how neatly they had been tucked away so that no one would question them, especially not me. "Ethan," I said gently, my voice softer now, not because I was unsure, but because I knew how much this would hurt him. "Do you remember when Olivia first told us she was pregnant?" He frowned slightly, the question catching him off guard. "Of course I do. It was early spring. We had dinner at your house. You made that roast you always make," he said, his voice slowing as he tried to follow where I was going. "Yes," I nodded. "And do you remember when you told me you had been traveling for work just before that? Nearly 3 weeks on the West Coast." His eyes narrowed, confusion deepening. "Yes, but what does that have to do with anything?" I took a small breath, steady and measured, the same way I had done the night before as I sat at my kitchen table replaying that video over and over again, not because I doubted what I saw, but because I needed to be absolutely certain before I allowed myself to act. "Because timelines matter," I said, quietly. "They always have, and they always will." Olivia let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous. Pregnancies are not exact science. Margaret, you cannot just do the math like that and come to conclusions," she said. But her voice had tightened, lost that smooth confidence she usually carried, and I noticed how her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the blanket again. "You are right," I agreed calmly. "They are not exact, but they are not meaningless either, and when you combine that with everything else, with what I was shown yesterday, with what I have already confirmed this morning, the picture becomes very clear." Ethan's head snapped toward me, his expression shifting from confusion to something more fragile, something that made my chest ache despite everything. "What were you shown?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. And for the first time since I walked into that hospital room, I allowed myself to meet Olivia's eyes directly, holding her gaze long enough for her to understand that whatever she had been hiding was no longer hidden. "The truth," I said simply, and the way her face changed in that moment told me everything I needed to know, long before I ever had to say another word. For a moment no one moved, not Ethan, not Olivia, not even the nurse who had paused just outside the doorway, as if she could still sense the tension hanging in the air behind her, and I could feel the room shifting, the careful balance that had existed only minutes ago now completely undone. "What truth?" Ethan asked again, louder this time, his voice carrying that edge I had not heard since he was a teenager, the edge of someone who felt something slipping beyond his control, and I turned my attention back to him, not rushing, not raising my voice, because I knew that what I said next needed to land clearly, without emotion clouding it. "The truth about the timing, about what you were told, and about what actually happened," I said, choosing each word carefully, and Olivia let out a sharp breath, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the panic beneath it. "This is insane," she said quickly, too quickly. "You are standing here making accusations in a hospital room, right after I gave birth. Do you hear yourself? And if I had been the woman I was 10 years ago, I might have stepped back then, might have apologized for the scene, might have told myself this was not the right moment. But clarity does something to you. It removes the need for approval. It strips away the fear of being misunderstood, and it leaves only what matters. I hear myself very clearly. I replied, my voice calm, steady, almost quiet, and that seemed to unsettle her more than anything else, because anger can be dismissed, but certainty cannot. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the small room before stopping again, his eyes moving between the two of us as if he were trying to find something familiar to hold on to. Mom, if you know something, you need to say it, he said. And there was something in his voice now that made my chest tighten. Not anger, not yet, but fear, the kind that comes when the ground beneath you starts to feel unstable. And I nodded slowly, because this was the moment I had prepared for, not emotionally, but deliberately, step by step since that phone call. Yesterday afternoon, I received something. I began, watching Olivia closely as I spoke, something that made me question everything I thought I understood about the last few months. Olivia shook her head immediately, her hand gripping the side of the bed. You cannot seriously be basing this on some random message. People send all kinds of nonsense. You do not even know who it came from, she said, her words overlapping, rushing together. And I noticed how she avoided looking directly at Ethan now, how her focus stayed fixed on me, as if she knew that if she met his eyes she might lose something she could not get back. You are right, I said again, nodding slightly. I did not know who it came from, which is exactly why I did not act on it right away. Ethan's brow furrowed, confusion deepening. Then why are we here right now? He asked, and I took a small step closer, not toward Olivia, but toward him, closing the distance just enough so he could see that I was not attacking him. I was trying to show him something, because I did not stop at that message, I said, my voice softening just slightly. I verified it. I checked dates. I confirmed details. I spoke to someone who had no reason to lie to me. And everything pointed to the same conclusion. Olivia's breath caught audibly now. And for a second, she looked very small in that hospital bed. Not weak, but cornered, like someone who had run out of explanations. This is not happening, she whispered under her breath. And Ethan heard it. I saw it in the way his posture stiffened, the way his eyes sharpened as he turned toward her, searching her face for something, anything that would contradict what he was starting to understand. Olivia, he said slowly, carefully, as if speaking too quickly might make the situation worse. Is there something you want to tell me? And in that moment, before she even opened her mouth, before any denial or explanation could be formed, I knew that the truth had already begun to reveal itself, not because of anything I said, but because of the silence that followed. The kind of silence that answers questions more honestly than words ever could. Olivia opened her mouth, but no words came out, and that was when Ethan's entire posture changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but in a slow, almost imperceptible way, like something inside him had shifted just enough to let doubt take hold. Olivia, he said again, softer this time, but there was a firmness underneath it now that had not been there before. Just tell me what is going on. And she shook her head quickly, her eyes darting between us as if she were searching for a version of this moment she could still control. There is nothing to tell, she said, but the confidence she had worn so easily before was gone, replaced by something thinner, something that sounded rehearsed rather than real. And I watched her carefully, not with anger, not even with judgment, but with the same clarity that had guided me since yesterday. Because once you see something for what it truly is, you cannot unsee it, no matter how much you might wish to. Then you will not mind if we confirm it, I said quietly, and that was the first time she looked directly at me with something that could not be disguised, fear, real and immediate, flashing across her face before she could hide it again. And Ethan saw it too. I knew he did because his breath caught slightly, and he took a small step back as if the space between them suddenly mattered. Confirm what? He asked, his voice tightening. And I did not rush my answer, because this was not about overwhelming him. It was about letting him arrive at the truth himself. The timeline, I said simply. And whether everything you have been told matches what is medically possible. Olivia let out a short, strained laugh. You are making this sound like some kind of investigation, she said. But there was no humor in it, only tension, and I gave a small, almost sympathetic nod. "It is an investigation," I replied, "because that is what happens when facts do not align." Ethan turned to her again, his expression searching, almost pleading now. "Olivia, please," he said, "just tell me if there is anything I should know." And for a moment, a very brief moment, I thought she might say something honest, something that would change the course of everything that followed. But instead she shook her head again, more firmly this time, as if repetition could make it true. "There is nothing," she insisted, and that was when I understood that she would not admit it. Not here, not like this, not unless she had no other choice. And that was why I had prepared for this moment the way I had, why I had not relied on words alone. "Ethan," I said gently, drawing his attention back to me. "Yesterday, after I received that message, I did not make assumptions. I went to someone who could help me verify what I was seeing." His brow furrowed again, confusion mixing with growing unease. "Who?" he asked, and I answered without hesitation. "Dr. Reynolds," I said. "Your father's old colleague, the one who still consults on cases like this." Olivia's hand tightened around the blanket again, and I noticed the way her shoulders stiffened at the name, a reaction so small most people would have missed it, but not me, not anymore. "I showed him everything," I continued, my voice even, measured, and I asked him one simple question, whether the dates, the travel, and the medical timeline could all be true at the same time. Ethan's face went still, as if he were holding himself completely in place just to hear the answer. "And what did he say?" he asked, and I met his eyes fully, giving him the respect of the truth without softening it. "He said they could not," I replied, and the silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more defined, because now it was not just confusion filling the space. It was the beginning of understanding, and understanding, once it starts, does not stop until it reaches the truth. The words seemed to settle over the room like a weight no one could lift, and for a long moment Ethan did not move, did not speak, as if his mind was trying to reject what it had just heard before it could fully take shape. "That does not make any sense," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction, as though he was repeating something he needed to believe rather than something he actually did, and I watched him carefully, not interrupting, not pushing, because this part could not be forced. It had to unfold on its own. Olivia shook her head quickly, seizing on his hesitation. "Exactly," she said, her voice rising slightly. "It does not make sense because it is not true. Margaret is twisting things. She is making assumptions based on incomplete information." And there it was again, that attempt to regain control, to reframe the situation before it slipped too far beyond her reach. But something had already shifted. I could see it in Ethan's eyes. The way he was no longer looking at her with unquestioning trust, but with careful distance, as if he were measuring each word instead of accepting it. "Then explain it," he said, turning fully toward her now, his voice steadier, firmer. "Just explain how it works, because if what Mom is saying is wrong, then it should be easy to clear this up." Olivia opened her mouth again, but this time she hesitated, just for a second, and that second was enough for doubt to take root in a way that could not be undone. "You do not understand how stressful this is," she said instead, her tone shifting, softer now, almost pleading. "I just gave birth, and now I am being accused of something I did not do. This is not fair." And I recognized that shift immediately, the move from defense to deflection, from facts to emotion, something that might have worked before, something that might have made Ethan step back, apologize, and protect her from discomfort. But not now, not after everything that had already been said. "I am not asking about fairness," Ethan replied quietly, and that was when I knew he was beginning to see it. Not completely, not yet, but enough to keep going. "I am asking about the timeline." Olivia looked at him then, really looked at him, and I saw the moment she realized that he was no longer standing entirely on her side, that something had shifted between them in a way she could not immediately fix, and fear flickered across her face again, sharper this time, harder to hide. "I told you everything," she insisted, but her voice was thinner now, less certain, and I could see Ethan noticing it, could see him holding on to each inconsistency as if it were a thread leading him somewhere he did not want to go. "No," he said slowly. "You told me what I needed to hear, but that is not the same as telling me everything." And that sentence hung in the air longer than any accusation could have, because it did not come from me. It came from him, from his own growing understanding, and I felt something inside me tighten, not relief, not satisfaction, but a quiet sadness for the moment that had just passed. The moment when trust begins to fracture, because once that happens, nothing is ever quite the same again. I took a small breath and reached into my purse, not dramatically, not as if unveiling something shocking, but with the same calm I had carried since the beginning, because this was not about spectacle, it was about clarity. Ethan, I said gently, drawing his attention back to me. I did not come here with just questions. I pulled out my phone and held it in my hand, not yet showing it, just letting him see that there was more, that this was not based on suspicion alone. I came here with confirmation. Olivia's eyes locked onto the phone immediately, and the color drained from her face in a way that no words could disguise. And in that instant, before anything else was said, before any evidence was even presented, the truth became undeniable, not because of what I had proven, but because of how she reacted to the possibility of being proven wrong. And Ethan saw it too. I knew he did, because his shoulders dropped slightly, as if something heavy had finally settled into place. And he looked at her one more time, not with anger, not yet, but with something far more difficult to face, disappointment. Olivia, he said quietly, what is on that phone? And for the first time since this began, she did not answer at all. Olivia's silence stretched longer than anything she had said so far, and in that silence I could see her thinking, calculating, searching for a version of the truth she could still control. But there are moments in life when control slips quietly out of your hands, not with noise or drama, but with a simple absence of words, and this was one of them. Ethan did not take his eyes off her, his expression steady now, no longer searching for reassurance, but waiting for honesty. And when it did not come, something inside him seemed to settle into place, not relief, not even anger, but acceptance of what he was beginning to understand. Show me, he said finally, his voice calm in a way that surprised even me. And I nodded once, because this was the moment I had prepared for, not with emotion, but with intention. I unlocked my phone and held it where he could see, not forcing it into his hands, just offering it, giving him the choice to look, because this truth had to be something he chose to face, not something pushed onto him. His hand hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking the phone, and I watched as his eyes moved across the screen, first confusion, then focus, then something deeper, something heavier. As recognition began to form, Olivia shifted in the bed again, her breathing uneven now, and I noticed how she no longer tried to interrupt, no longer tried to explain, because she understood that whatever was on that screen was not something she could talk her way out of. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as he continued watching, the room so quiet that even the faint sounds from the hallway outside seemed distant, irrelevant. And when the video ended, he did not immediately look up. He simply stood there, holding the phone, as if the weight of it had changed, as if it now carried something far more significant than just a piece of technology. When was this taken? He asked after a moment, his voice low, controlled. And I answered just as calmly. 2 months before you told me about the pregnancy. He nodded once, slowly, as if fitting that piece into the larger picture forming in his mind. And then he finally looked at Olivia, not with the same uncertainty as before, but with a clarity that matched my own. Do you want to explain this? He asked, and this time his question was not searching, it was direct, grounded in something real. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, as if hoping that when she opened them the situation would have changed, but it had not. And when she looked at him again, the composure she had tried so hard to maintain was gone, replaced by something far more fragile. It is not what it looks like, she said quietly, and I felt a small, almost imperceptible shift inside myself, not because of her words, but because of how predictable they were, how often people reach for that sentence when there is nothing else left to say. Ethan did not react immediately. He simply held her gaze, letting the words settle before responding. Then tell me what it is, he said, and for a moment it seemed like she might try again, might attempt to reshape the narrative into something she could survive. But the truth has a way of narrowing your options until there are none left, and I saw it in the way her shoulders dropped slightly, in the way her hands relaxed their grip on the blanket, not in defeat, but in recognition that the moment she had been avoiding had finally arrived. "I was going to tell you," she said softly, and even as the words left her mouth, they sounded incomplete, like something that had waited too long to be spoken. Ethan exhaled slowly, a sound that carried more weight than any raised voice could have, and for a brief second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who believed that honesty was something you could always count on, and I knew that what came next would take that belief and reshape it into something far more complicated, something far less certain, and I remained where I was, quiet, steady, because this was no longer my moment to lead, it was his moment to understand. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves had moved closer to contain what was unfolding inside it, and I could see Ethan processing every word Olivia had just said, not reacting immediately, not raising his voice, but letting the weight of it settle into something real, something permanent. "You were going to tell me," he repeated slowly, as if testing the truth of it, and Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening now, though no tears fell. "I just did not know how," she said, her voice quieter than before, stripped of the confidence she had carried for so long, and I watched Ethan carefully, because this was the moment where many people choose comfort over truth, where they accept incomplete answers just to avoid the full impact of what is being revealed. But Ethan did not look away this time. He did not step back. Instead, he took a small breath and asked the question that mattered. "When?" he said, just one word, but it carried everything. Olivia hesitated again, and that hesitation spoke louder than anything she could have said. "Before the baby was born," she answered finally, but even as she said it, it sounded uncertain, like a promise made too late to matter. Ethan nodded once, slowly, absorbing it. "So not when you found out," he said, his tone calm but precise. "Not when you knew there was a chance, but later, after everything was already in motion." Olivia looked down at her hands, unable to meet his eyes now, and that silence was answer enough. I felt a quiet ache in my chest, not for her, but for him, for the realization that was settling into place piece by piece, because betrayal is not just about what happened, it is about the time it was allowed to continue, the space where honesty could have existed but did not. "Who is he?" Ethan asked next, and this time his voice was different, not louder, but firmer, grounded in something that would not be easily shaken. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, but hollow. "Someone from before," she said, and I could see Ethan absorbing that, placing it into the timeline we had already uncovered, aligning it with the dates, the travel, the impossibility of what he had been told. "Before what?" he pressed gently, and she hesitated again, but there was nowhere left to go now, no version of the story that could avoid the truth entirely. "Before things became serious with us," she admitted, and the room went quiet again, not with confusion this time, but with clarity, because everything now fit together in a way that could not be undone. Ethan looked down at the phone still in his hand, then back at her, and for the first time, there was no question in his eyes, only understanding, and with it, a kind of distance that had not been there before. "And you never thought I deserved to know that there was even a possibility," he said, not accusing, not angry, just stating what had already become clear. Olivia's shoulders dropped slightly, the last of her resistance fading. "I thought it would not matter," she said softly. "I thought everything would be fine." And I felt that same clarity settle deeper inside me, because that is what this had always been about, not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, but a choice, a decision to let something continue in silence and hope it would never be questioned. Ethan exhaled slowly, a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of everything he had just learned, and then he looked at me, not for guidance, but with a quiet recognition of what I had done, of why I had done it. And I met his gaze without speaking, because there was nothing left to explain. The truth was already here, fully revealed, and all that remained now was what he chose to do with it. Ethan did not speak right away, and that silence felt different from the others, heavier, more final, as if something inside him had reached a conclusion he could not ignore. He looked at Olivia for a long moment, not searching anymore, not hoping for a different answer, but seeing her clearly for the first time without the comfort of assumption. "You thought it would not matter," he repeated quietly, and there was no anger in his voice, which somehow made it more unsettling, more absolute. Olivia nodded faintly, her eyes fixed on the blanket in her hands as if it could shield her from what was happening. "I thought we were already building a life together," she said, her voice soft but strained. "I thought this would just become part of that." Ethan let out a slow breath, and I could see the shift in him, not explosive, not dramatic, but steady, like a door closing without noise. "You decided that for both of us," he said, and this time there was something firm in his tone, not raised, not harsh, but grounded in a way that left no room for interpretation. Olivia looked up at him then, her expression fragile, almost pleading. "I did not want to lose you," she said, and for a moment I saw the version of her I had once believed in, the one who smiled easily, who spoke gently, who seemed to bring warmth into our family. But now that image felt distant, like something remembered rather than real. Ethan shook his head slightly, not in anger, but in quiet disbelief. "You already did," he said, and the simplicity of those words carried more weight than any accusation ever could. The room fell silent again. But this time it was not filled with confusion or tension. It was filled with something else, something resolved. I stood where I was, not stepping in, not guiding, because this was no longer my role. This was Ethan's moment, his decision, his understanding. And I knew better than to interfere with that. Olivia swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now, what happens now?" she asked, and that question hung in the air, not directed at me, not even fully directed at Ethan, but at the situation itself, at the reality that had just taken shape around us. Ethan looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at her, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, controlled, but distant in a way that had not been there before. "Now we deal with the truth," he said, and I saw Olivia's shoulders drop slightly, as if the last of her resistance had finally given way, not because she agreed, but because she understood that there was nothing left to argue against. Ethan glanced toward the door where the nurse had disappeared earlier, then back at me, and there was a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes, not gratitude exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes when someone sees the full weight of a decision you made, even if they wish it had never been necessary. I met his gaze calmly, offering nothing more than presence, because sometimes that is all that is needed, not words, not reassurance, just the understanding that the truth, once revealed, does not need to be defended. Olivia leaned back slightly against the pillows, her energy fading, her voice soft and uncertain. "Are you saying," she began, but she did not finish the sentence, and she did not need to, because Ethan understood. We all did. He did not answer immediately. He simply stood there for a moment longer, then turned slightly toward the door, as if grounding himself in something outside the room, something steady, before looking back at her. "I am saying that nothing moves forward until we are honest about where we stand," he replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice now, no confusion, only clarity, the kind that does not come easily, but once it arrives, it does not leave. And as I stood there, watching the two of them, I realized that this moment was not about the past anymore, not about what had been hidden or misunderstood, but about what would come next. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to feel a quiet certainty, not in the outcome, but in the fact that the truth had finally been given the space it deserved. Ethan stood there for a long moment after his last words, as if giving the room itself time to catch up with what had just been decided. And then he moved, not quickly, not with urgency, but with a calm, deliberate motion that made everything feel more final. He walked toward the door, paused for just a second, then stepped out into the hallway, leaving it slightly open behind him, and the quiet that followed was different again. No longer tense, no longer uncertain, but settled, like something had reached its natural conclusion. Olivia did not call after him, did not try to stop him. She simply sat there, her hands resting loosely on the blanket now, her gaze unfocused as if she were looking at something far beyond the walls of that room. And I remained where I was, not rushing to fill the silence, because there was nothing left to say that had not already been made clear. After a few moments, she finally spoke, her voice low, almost distant. "You planned this," she said, not accusing, not even surprised, just stating it as something she had come to understand, and I nodded once, slowly. "I prepared," I replied, my tone even, Because there was a difference. Planning suggests intention to harm. Preparation is simply choosing not to be unprepared. She gave a small, tired exhale, the kind that comes when resistance has fully faded. You could have told him sooner, she said. And I considered that for a moment, not defensively, but honestly, because it was a fair question. I could have, I admitted. But then it would have been a conversation, not a reality. She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since everything had unraveled, and there was something in her expression that had not been there before, not defiance, not fear, but understanding, even if she did not agree with it. You wanted him to see it for himself, she said quietly, and I nodded again. Yes, I answered, because some truths only matter when they are undeniable. She leaned back slightly against the pillows, her energy clearly drained, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The weight of everything that had happened settling into a kind of stillness. After a while, the door opened again, and Ethan stepped back inside, his expression composed, controlled, but different in a way that did not need explanation. He had made a decision, not fully, not completely, but enough to know where he stood in this moment. He walked back to the side of the bed, his gaze moving briefly to Olivia before settling into something steady. The nurse is bringing the baby back, he said, his voice calm, measured. And Olivia's eyes flickered with something unreadable, hope, fear. Perhaps both. Ethan continued before she could speak. We are going to do a proper test, he added, not raising his voice, not demanding, simply stating what would happen next. And there was no argument from her this time, no attempt to redirect or explain, just a quiet acceptance that this step could no longer be avoided. I watched them both for a moment, then took a small step back, giving them space. Because this part did not belong to me anymore. It belonged to them, to whatever came after. Truth replaces assumption. Ethan glanced at me briefly, and there was something in that look, not approval, not even agreement, but acknowledgement, the kind that exists between people who understand that something difficult had to be done, even if it was not what anyone wanted, and I returned it with a small nod, nothing more, because words would only complicate what was already clear. As the nurse re-entered the room, carrying the baby carefully in her arms, the atmosphere shifted one last time. Not back to what it had been, but into something new, something uncertain but grounded in reality rather than illusion. And as I turned toward the door, stepping quietly out into the hallway, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet sense of completion, because I had not come here to win anything. I had come to make sure that the truth, however difficult, was given the space it deserved, and now that it had been, the rest was no longer mine to carry.